So last night we had the numbers released from Nintendo for this past fiscal quarter, which is that entire holiday season, so like October, November, December. And going into it, we knew they had to sell a lot. I mean, just a lot of units to even get close to their 20 million target. And they're not going to get there seemingly because they did actually lower their expectations, which a lot of people are probably even talking about their stock now that has started to drop almost 5%. That's what that more or less has to do with, because what Nintendo has actually reported here is good from the sense of making money, and the most important part about the system, which is software sales, are almost unthinkable. It is something else to see, and that is of course what usually makes your money, not necessarily the hardware, but the software. We're going to go over all of this though, and we're also going to touch a bit on the 3DS, and then as well with the Switch and where it can kind of go from here in the quarter that it's in, and why there are some rumors that are flying around that we'll also talk about later on today that kind of also lends to what we're seeing with these sales numbers. So make sure you guys check that out later on today as well, and like this video if you do enjoy it. So let's actually take a look at the hardware first of all, and you're going to see just what they usually put out in their snapshot with their investors page and everything. They're very transparent about their hardware numbers completely. Like, we see Microsoft doesn't even talk about it. Nintendo will give you like down to like almost the single unit as to how it's sold. So the hardware right now as it sits for the Switch is at 32.27 million units. That's pretty good for being out less than 2 years now, right? That is tremendous, and that tells me that it's going to be coming up on the Xbox One pretty quickly. I think this year it's going to pass the Xbox One going into the holiday season. We'll probably hear about that completely next year. The Xbox One, of course, is right around 41 million, as we've heard, so the Switch is less than 10 million behind. That is very impressive. Now, I said they lowered the fiscal year forecast. They did. It's down from 20 million down to 17 million, which is a number that they should be able to reach, considering their fiscal year cumulative right now is at 14.49 million. So they're at 14.5 million. They need to get roughly 2.5 million more Switch units this quarter that we're in right now, so January, February, and March, to finish up and get to that 17. I think they'll actually eclipse that 17 million by a bit, and that way the next time they have to report numbers, it'll be more good news rather than having to lower. I think this was the time they were going to have to do it, because there's some very good news with some other stuff. This quarter though, this past quarter, they sold 9.42 million Switch units. That is a lot to sell. I mean, that is an obscene amount to sell in a 3-month span. And then the software for that quarter was also over 52 million units, bringing the cumulative for that fiscal year to 94.64 million, making the lifetime to date 163.61 million software units, which is again where you make a lot of your money in less than 2 years. There's a lot of games to sell. Now, if we move over to the 3DS very quickly, the fiscal year cumulative is 2.31 million. That is actually down quite a bit. I believe that's down over 60% year to year. So the 3DS is on its way out. I don't think anyone's shocked by that with the Switch storming onto the scene. But that does bring the lifetime to date numbers for the 3DS to 74.8 million. I want you to take a look at the Switch and then the 3DS. The 3DS is what, going into its 8th year, but look how the Switch has really sprinted to nearly half of what the 3DS has sold. It really is tremendous what they've done with the Switch so far. That quarter for the 3DS though, 1.31 million units, and then their software is 4.81 million. I think I look at this, and this is probably just free money, Nintendo, just about, because of course they're not putting a lot of money into software right now, and the hardware doesn't cost much to produce at all. So they're actually making decent money from the 3DS, but they did have to drop their fiscal year forecast from 4 million down to 2.6 million. So they have actually dropped forecast on both of their hardware units, and that's, again, probably why the investors are like, I wanted you to do more. That's the problem we have with investors and these companies tied up with them. They're pretty much always at the mercy of the investors, so they always have a hard time telling them these things because they usually react in the way that you're seeing. Now let me show you what's absolutely ridiculous about what they've done this quarter. Let me shift over to the top selling units, and what you're about to see is real, and it's hard to believe. So take a look at this. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has, at this point in time, now sold over 15 million units. That is almost half of the entire Switch install base has purchased Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That is a game that is essentially ported with some extra features like battle mode, for example, from the Wii U. That's ridiculous, right? 15 million units on Mario Kart 8 Deluxe just on the Switch. That actually sold nearly 4 million. It was actually 3.85 million this past quarter, which is actually something that has outsold pretty much anything that has not released in that quarter. It's absolutely ridiculous. Super Mario Odyssey is at 13.76 million. That actually sold 1.59 million this last quarter. And get this, this is where things get ridiculous. Smash Bros. Ultimate, as of the time that they have recorded this, had not been out for a full month. Remember, it launched after the first week of December, and this is up through December 31st. So this is over 3 weeks, right? But not by much, like 3.5 weeks. Sold 12.08 million. Just 12 million units in 3.5 weeks. That is unthinkable. That is for one system, and it is an exclusive. That is ridiculous. Remember, we just talked about Spider-Man hitting 9 million, and that launched at the beginning of September. Smash Bros. Ultimate sold 3 million more, and it hasn't even been out for 4 weeks. So I have never seen something like that, especially on a system like this with this install base. That is something else to see. Breath of the Wild, 1.4 million. That's actually at 11.68 million. So think about that for a second here. Smash Bros. Ultimate became the third best-selling game on the Switch in less than 4 weeks. And it eclipsed several games that have been out for a while now. I mean, really think about that for a minute. Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. This is one that people kind of wrote off and said it's not going to do well. 10 million units, though. 10 million units since its launch. So, yes, Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu has it's done really well. It's definitely done way better than what people were anticipating. And I know it has dropped off a bit since its launch, if you look at Media Creates, for example, and even the MPDs. But it will, of course, continue to sell going forward. And think about it this way. With the controversy around this game, going into this year, right, with the next Pokemon game that comes out, where there'll probably be no controversy because it's the one that all the Pokemon fans say that they want. I'm wondering, with the bigger install base, what is that Pokemon game going to do? Because if this did 10 million with a smaller install base that will, of course, be around when we get into October, November this year, and pretty much the entire Pokemon fandom probably being behind it, is that going to be a 15 million, 20 million seller in the same time frame as this one? I would think it's going to sell more at least. Otherwise, that wouldn't be great, obviously, because then Game Freak and everyone will look at Let's Go and be like, oh, that's the future of the series. No, I do think they're going to keep doing both, but it makes you wonder. Splatoon 2 sold under 1 million this past fiscal quarter, but it is still at 8.27 million now, so it is coming up on that 10 million mark. Think about it this way. We have 5 games that have already crossed 10 million units in less than 2 years for this system. That is something else. Mario Party, Super Mario Party is actually at 5.3 million. That actually came out again in October for this fiscal quarter, so that has also done really well. 1-2 Switch somehow has sold almost 3 million units. I don't know how, but it almost has. That's a game that probably should have been a pack-in, but hey, it still sold almost 3 million, so I guess Nintendo knows what they're doing with that. Mario Tennis Aces at 2.53 million. That also kind of dropped off. That only sold 0.37 million, so 370,000 in the last fiscal quarter. And then Kirby Star Allies, 2.42 million. That also has fallen off a bit, 320,000 units. But that game is a bit older, and of course, it's not a Zelda, for example, or a Smash Bros, or a Pokemon, or even a Splatoon. So I at least understand why it's not doing as well as those. So even though the hardware was actually lowered for expectations, the software was technically raised to 110 million units is what they're looking to push out for this fiscal year. They don't have to get too much more, of course, about 15 million or so to get there, and I think they'll be able to do that easily. The Switch is selling software like nobody's business right now, so that shouldn't be hard to do. There's also a chance that they actually creep past $10 billion in revenue for this fiscal year that we're in now. I think that's another easily achievable goal. And it's interesting looking forward to this year, as there are now rumors flying around that a cheaper Switch would actually make it a bit easier to reach some of these goals that they've had. Think about it this way. If this past holiday there was a $200 Switch, they may have sold 2 Switches to one family, and instead of them having to buy something like one Switch for $300, they may have bought 2 Switches for $400 if there was something like a Switch Mini on the market. That's a rumor we're actually going to go over later on today, because that looks like it's becoming a reality right now with what we're seeing, and it will make their fiscal years a little easier going forward, as of course, investors do look at those units rather than just dollar sales. And the Switch right now and Nintendo, they're doing really well despite having to lower hardware anticipations of how they're going to sell and forecasts. They're still doing much better than they were doing last year, where they were just over $7 billion around this time. They're now over $9 billion. So it doesn't seem like money is hurting. It's just investors don't want to hear about things being lowered for expectations. They want more and more and more and more. And that's why you see companies, of course, like Activision get mad when they sell $500 million worth of Call of Duty in like the first week. It's not good enough, is the idea. They'll rebound with their stock because what they're showing here is good for the long term. And think about it this way, the Switch, 32 million units. It's coming up on the Super Nintendo's amount. It's going to pass the Xbox amount this year, even if Xbox starts to do better, although it seems like they're kind of dropping off. The Switch will start to get, I think, third-party support that is specifically targeted at the Switch. That's kind of been the goal, I think, for Switch owners and Nintendo, is for the Switch to start getting third-party games like an Octopath Traveler that is geared specifically at the Switch and its audience, rather than try to fit these third-party games that weren't originally designed for the Switch with features in mind, performance in mind. Get games like an Octopath Traveler, for example, get it on the Switch, and there is a large enough install base for these companies to take a chance and do that, and we're getting there. I've said that 40 million is probably the goal to where these third parties will actually take shots at exclusives for the system, and I still think that's true, and it seems Nintendo's going to be getting there easily by the end of this year, just in general, 2019. So big things happening for the Switch. We'll see what happens in this fiscal quarter, because there's not a lot other than Yoshi, which is right at the end. We need to see a bit more that gets announced, and we'll see if they have anything else for us going forward here, whether it's press releases or direct or just something. We'll find out as we go along. But as always, guys, enjoy this video, hit the like button, it does help out. If not a dislike, leave comments down below about everything with Nintendo's financials. Let me know what you think about the Switch going forward and how many that they've sold, which is now over 32 million. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.